In 2025, I decided to embark upon the crusade of playing every new game that came out during the year that looked like something I would be interested in. And I failed. There were just too fucking many. And to those who say that gaming is dead or doomed or on its way to perish, I say, you guys are like Larry in Leisure Suit Larry 2, looking for love in several wrong places. Because the world of games is a little bit like the world of porn. Whatever it is you're into, there is something for you. And no, don't even think of coming at me with the argument of, yeah, but it's a matter of quality. No, there is very high quality stuff out there for you. But I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that there's also oceans of shit. And that's why I have not one, not two, but 3 lists of games that came out in 2025. Yup, that's how many games I played this year. The most disappointing games, the most pleasant surprises of the year, and the very best games of 2025 will all get their snippet here in your old entertainment. Let it not be said that I hold out on you. And because I'm the kind of guy who always likes to hear the bad news first, let's start with the most disappointing games of 2025. Are you that type of guy, by the way? Bad news first. I feel like everyone is. Know that this is not a list of bad games. In fact, most of them aren't even bad, just games that didn't meet my expectations for whatever reason. Some fucked up one particular thing that was very important to me, some didn't do enough of this, that, or the other thing that I wanted to see, and some are sequels that did more of the same and failed to keep me entertained because of that, etc. I'm also not sorting them from best to worst, nor from worst to best. I'm sorting with a criteria of expectations versus reality, from the smallest gap to the biggest one, and that includes the honorable, or in this case, dishonorable mentions. And yes, we have a few of those, so let's get to them. Clair Obscure Expedition 33. And let's kick this thing off with the game that everyone and their mom loved to hell and back this year. There was enough footage out there and plenty of reviews for me to know that this game, right out of the gates, was not the type of RPG that I enjoy. And that's one of the reasons it didn't make the list and why it sits at the bottom of the honorable mentions. I more or less knew what I was getting into. The other reason is that there is actually a lot to like about this game. Excellent production value, solid artistic vision, cohesive narrative, and a killer soundtrack. Yup, everything was great.
Apart from, of course, playing the game part.
I didn't like exploration, questing, or combat for all the reasons that I talked about in the video I made about the game, and I found the story to be a little bit on the pretentious side. But the reason why I decided to include this game here is because the hype was just too big and I just had to see what the fuzz was about. Maybe I was missing out on something that I wasn't seeing on the trailers or reviews? Nope, the game was definitely not for me. Dice Legends. So Dice Legends is a game that combines card and dice battler mechanics, and in paper that sounded like an idea full of potential. I was immediately intrigued and excited, and it's not a bad game. It does have a couple of interesting ideas and a few things that you don't see every day. You can equip your character with gear, and the gear that you find along the way can actually work as the turnstone of your build, which isn't always the case in these games. More often than not, when you have gear in a card battler, is frustratingly generic, and it only adds flat stats to whatever it is you're doing. And I'm happy to report that that's not the case with Dice Legends. Also, the story
is weird.
But it's a good kind of weird, I would say. But other than that, fuck's sake, they couldn't have played it safer if they had tried. This game has all the typical things that you find in a card battler presented in the typical way you always see in these games. Beyond the very premise of being a blend between card and dice battler, and perhaps the fact that you have full cards and half cards, there isn't an ounce of originality in this game. You have the typical map with the typical branching paths, the typical remove, purchase, or upgrade mechanic, the typical resting area, the typical elite encounters, the typical first character that is some form of ironclad from Slay the Spire, the typical, well, everything really. The strategic deck building aspect of the game is generic, the synergies are lacking in creativity, there is no exciting reroll dice mechanics like the ones you have in games like Spell Rogue, there are no tactics that involve your discard and draw piles, nothing. And I think this was a huge wasted opportunity for a game that has a strong core premise. Puzzle Parasite. Thank you for playing. You should have sucked my dick. Fuck's sake. This is hands down, without question, the most frustrating and annoying game that I have played all the way through to the end. And it's not even remotely close. Why did you finish it then, you may wonder? Well, the best way I can put it is that this game gave me blue balls. It teased me all the way through with intrigue and with decently designed puzzles, only to torture me every single level with atrocious controls, and to give me one of the most horrendous endings that I have seen in the history of this form of entertainment. And I have seen some shit. In theory, Puzzle Parasite was supposed to be some form of Portal 2 light, and I thought,
well, alright.
Portal 2 is one of those precious few games in history that I would give a perfect 10 to. It's not my favorite game, and it's not exactly up my alley, but it nailed everything it sought to accomplish beautifully, and it felt so good and so rewarding to play. This game, however, is the evil version of that experience. Puzzle Parasite is 50% puzzle game, 50% cricket simulator, 100% pain in the ass. And the main problem with this game is that it's consistently telling you, let's get precise. But it makes it completely impossible for you to be precise with the way it handles its physics. This game has two main mechanics. There is a gravitational pull that you use to yank balls to your position, and using a cricket mallet, yeah, just go with it, to bat these balls to where you want them to go. And the problem with this is that the game asks you to be very extremely precise, but it makes it virtually impossible for you to anticipate where your hit is going to go based on the angle and the potency of your strike. It's like threading a needle wearing an atmospheric diving suit. I was expecting a Portal-like puzzle game that I could pick up and play as a palate cleanser that I could use to take a break from those 80-hour plus games that take up the bulk of my gaming year. What I got was a game that I finished in less than 7 hours, but felt like a 40-hour game in which I felt relief rather than satisfaction every time I completed a level, and that gave me blue balls for so long that they eventually turned purple. Bloodshed. So in 2025 I played Soulslinger Envoy of Death by Head Up, and it took me a couple dozen hours, but I eventually discovered all the good stuff the game had to offer, which turned out to be more than I expected. But the game got mixed reviews on Steam. Probably because it was off to a rocky start with all its performance issues. A month later though, these guys released Bloodshed, an FPS that looked like something out of the early 90s, back in the golden age of the John Romero first-person shooters. It got very positive reviews on Steam initially, and even a Discord dweller who believes gaming died in the mid-2000s posted the game's trailer. Well, the math was simple. This game that I liked by these guys got mixed reviews on Steam. This other game by these same guys gets very positive reviews on Steam equals I must like it a heck of a lot more, right?
Wrong.
Well, no. This was one of the few games that I played in 2025 that I wished I hadn't played for as long as I did. The gameplay is repetitive, all the playable characters work exactly the same, only a couple of skills have a modicum of tactical value, and all those different enemies you blast through endlessly are a big game of smoke and mirrors, because in truth, there were just a handful of enemies who have truly different attacks. Only a couple of missions have interesting secondary objectives, and the post-final boss gameplay is a bore fest of grind. For me, this game ran on completionist fumes for about 10 hours past the fun threshold because there were achievements to complete. Thankfully, I had the sense to say fuck this shit only a couple of hours after I reached that threshold. But those are the dishonorable mentions. Here are the games that truly disappointed me in 2025. Number 10, Hades 2. Hades 2 is of course not a bad game. It's actually a pretty good deal for the price. In fact, you can get it for $15 in my region now, which is an insanely good price for a game with this level of production values. Now, when it comes to Hades 2, the one recurrent thing that you will hear coming from the camp of those who didn't like it as much is that it's more of the same. And I am firmly one of those people. Now, at the sole mention of this argument, there will be those who will roll their eyes and write yet another 2-page essay on why more of the same is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't matter. Your 2-page essay isn't going to make me retroactively enjoy the game, and it's not going to convince those who didn't like Hades 2 because they felt like the game didn't bring anything significant to the table that they're wrong. The original Hades found its rightful place in history as one of the most celebrated games of the 2020s, not because of its snappy combat, its rewarding meta progression, its deceptively wholesome story, and its refreshing take on Greek mythology that established very clear rules about how much it would adhere to the original representation and about how far it would go in not taking itself too seriously. A representation of the Greek mythos that was lighthearted, fun, and funny, but that never crossed over into farce territory. It found its place in gaming history because there was nothing quite like it at the time. An isometric roguelike with real-time combat that told a story through snippets that got revealed with every attempt, unique art style, and a representation of Greek mythology that was fun and refreshing, as opposed to gloomy and nihilistic. The novelty factor was sky high with this one. But it's completely depleted in Hades 2. Yes, there are some tweaks and turns to the formula here and there, but while the first one went all in with its innovative premise, Hades 2 plays it safe. And if you had your fill of Hades with the first game in the series, this one is likely going to outstay its welcome fast. There are many new mechanics in Hades 2. You have the familiars, which are cute pets that you recruit over multiple runs, and that you can upgrade in more than one way. And you have a card-based system of perks in which you have a limit of points, and in which each card has a cost. These mechanics, while interesting in theory, feel like layers that were added to a game with already established game mechanics. They don't contribute to the build aspect of your character, they don't synergize in interesting ways with your weapons or with your blessings, and they simply don't feel like moving parts that you can use to make your own overarching strategy. You have new weapons, and they are different from the ones you had in Hades, but they feel like a DLC pack that you could have downloaded for the original game. Monster Train 2 also came out this year, and the new mechanics and features it brings to the table make the game feel familiar, but also like something new and exciting. That was what I was expecting and didn't get from Hades 2. Also, the story, minor spoilers I guess, is about the Titan Kronos coming back and taking over Hades' throne and waging war against Olympus. In the original Hades, Zagreus was all hell-bent on finding his mother and subsequently bringing his family together. He fought with great purpose against the odds and against his father's will, and if you finished the game enough times, you saw him ultimately succeed in reuniting his family. Both Hades and Zagreus had phenomenal character arcs that ended with them seeing merit in what the other one was trying to do and putting their differences behind them. For all of this, it would have made all the sense in the world for Zagreus to be the protagonist of the story in Hades 2. To have Kronos destroy everything he worked so hard to achieve in the first game, and to have him fight hard to reclaim it, I would have been immediately invested. But you have newcomer Melinoe, a character that we had not heard about before, stepping up as the protagonist of the story. And the writers are well aware that this was not a good decision, and the biggest evidence of this, in my book, is the blatant use they make of lamp shading at one point in the story. Lamp shading is a storytelling technique where writers directly acknowledge an absurd, cliched, or illogical plot point, or events or characters that shouldn't be in the story or should be different, to lessen the audience's disbelief. In this case, it comes in the form of Nemesis telling Melinoe that she likely won't succeed in her endeavor because there is no personal stake for her, because she wasn't part of the family until recently, or something like that. Nice try, but you should have made Zagreus the protagonist. But you know why Melinoe is the protagonist, I know why Melinoe is the protagonist, everybody knows why she is the protagonist.
Representation!
And it's not a good reason. It's also a wasted opportunity, because you could have had both Zagreus and Melinoe as playable characters. The best thing about Hades 2 is that you now have two distinct major paths that you can follow that lead to two different final bosses. You could have had Zagreus fighting to recover what was taken from him as he tried to make it to Kronos' throne, and Melinoe fighting to help Olympus against Prometheus. They could have met at some point and forged some sort of alliance. Melinoe could have been a character who can survive on the surface by default, and her mission could have been to find a way for Zagreus to also be able to fight in the surface, so that the player could then choose between Zagreus and Melinoe to fight either in the underworld or the surface. You could have had Zagreus specific and Melinoe specific weapons, mechanics, and goals. You could have even had goals in which they fought together with the computer taking over the other character. Like I said, Hades 2 is not a bad game, and it's not terribly disappointing. It just wasn't as exciting or as innovative as the first one, and the things it brought to the table didn't make the game feel fresh. After a few runs, I was already looking for something else to play. Number 9, Starless Abyss. This sounded like an amazing game in theory. It was promoted as a sci-fi, Lovecraftian, horror-inspired card battler in space, in which you controlled a fleet of ships and in which your position on the grid mattered for attacks and defense. And all of that sounded like the stuff dreams are made of. And it's not a bad game for 1 or 2 runs. There is an interesting tactical challenge, and the game requires you to build your deck around a sensible overarching strategy. The problem is that cards aren't just interesting enough to play several runs and try different builds. There are no fuck yeah synergies between cards, and worst yet, there aren't any cool cross-ship synergies. See, these party-based card battlers thrive on cross-character synergies that make you feel like you wouldn't have overcome the battle if your party members hadn't worked jointly. I prefer those in which each character has its own turn and its own deck. So, the RPG formula, if you would. But even if they have a shared deck, cards have to feel like they belong to one of the characters, and like they wouldn't be in your deck if you hadn't chosen that character to be in your party. This is not how Starless Abyss feels. Also, I was able to finish the run successfully in my first try, and by the end of it, I didn't feel like the game had something else in store for me progression-wise. Even games like Dice Legends try to encourage you to play again by sending the message that you ain't seen nothing yet. Others have some form of ascension level based progression system that make it abundantly clear that higher ascension levels demand a deeper understanding of the game's strategic and tactical dimension. Starless Abyss didn't feel like a game where I wanted to explore that. And unless the base game is crazy fun, that is a letdown in this genre. Number 8, Hunter's Moon, a Sovereign Syndicate adventure. I know that as an IP, Sovereign Syndicate is not even in the same universe as Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, or any of these other intellectual properties that have been desecrated in recent memory. But let me tell you one thing. Hunter's Moon, a Sovereign Syndicate adventure makes Rings of Power, The Acolyte, or Starfleet Academy look like the paragon of faithfulness of their respective OG lores. As I was playing the game, there was one question that I wanted answered more than anything that had to do with the story.
What the fuck is this?
Sovereign Syndicate is not bad at all as an IP. It's not hard to imagine good games, TV shows, and books based on the concept of the RPG that came out in 2024. The lore is deep and gripping, characters are complex, nuanced, and colorful, and the IP handles really well the concept of a secret agency in the service of the crown who hires individuals who are tremendously troubled and flawed, but who also have exceptional talents. This combination makes them perfect to do Her Majesty's dirty work. These people are special, but that means that they are also in a special type of trouble, and because of that they can't afford to say no to the Queen. The RPG that we played in 2024 wasn't great as an RPG. For all its choices and skill checks, it never felt like a game in which you had any real agency over how the events unfolded. Also, Clara, Atticus, and Teddy felt very much like their own people, not like characters that you could chisel with your decisions and actions. But the story, the setting, and the characters were all phenomenal, and it was exquisitely written. Hunter's Moon, a Sovereign Syndicate adventure, is a card battler based on the IP. You have some of the characters from the RPG that came out in 2024, like the fixer Molly and her dog Hercules. There is a crazy-ass dwarf inventor who has a flying robot called Hugo. The pair feel like dollar store versions of Teddy Redgrave and his robot Otto. The setting is somewhat reminiscent of the setting in Sovereign Syndicate, and the word syndicate gets thrown around quite a bit. The game itself is a shameless copycat of Menace from the Deep, to the point of being suspicious. The card system that you use to move from one event to the next, the non-combat events, the way in which you gather resources to build your stronghold, the type of cards that you have, and the fact that you have health and sanity, these things are just way too similar to be a coincidence. Even the story and the visuals lean very heavily into the psychological eldritch horror vibe. But that was what Menace from the Deep was about. It told a Lovecraftian story after all, but this theme feels incredibly crowbarred in a Sovereign Syndicate game. Even the first character that you get to play as in Sovereign Syndicate, which is Molly, is very similar to the first class available that you can play as in Menace from the Deep. They both have a dog companion and similar cards. These two games also have the same big problem, which is that the story is completely detached from the gameplay. This can't be a coincidence. It feels as though the developers and writers from Menace from the Deep had been given the rights to the Sovereign Syndicate IP, and they decided to use it as a second chance to promote their own idea. And you know what's even worse? That Menace from the Deep isn't even a good game to begin with. This has to be the shallowest use of an IP that I have ever seen. And it makes me wonder, what was even the point? We're not talking Lord of the Rings here. Sovereign Syndicate is a discrete IP with a heck of a lot of potential, of which only one game has been made. It's not like it's going to pump up the sales for this card battler. You could have just as well started over from scratch with a new IP. I was moderately interested in a Sovereign Syndicate themed card battler because, like I said, the IP has a lot of potential, but Hunter's Moon, a Sovereign Syndicate adventure, was just as far from my expectations as it could have been. Big disappointment, this one. Number 7, Nights in Tight Spaces. Citizen Sleeper, Monster Train, Hades, and Fights in Tight Spaces. These games don't have much in common, other than the fact that they were all highly praised for bringing something new, fresh, and exciting to the table in their respective genres. Years after their initial release, they all still have very positive reviews on Steam, because they were not only innovative, but also easy to learn and fun to play. The other thing that these games have in common is that they all got sequels in the year 2025. The good ones I'll talk about in another list, but I will say this about them now. They were the right type of sequel for their series. Monster Train 2 added a whole new cast of mechanics, features, and even a new game mode that changed the way you played the game completely. Jump Over the Age used Citizen Sleeper's core mechanics as the building blocks for new features and mechanics, like companions, missions, and a mobile home with which you could live the space van life. All of these things contributed to bring Citizen Sleeper 2 closer to the RPG experience that long-term fans of the genre have always craved. Nights in Tight Spaces, unfortunately, didn't do any of this, and it is a pity, because I was very impressed during the first few hours of the game. Very. For someone who is a fan of medieval fantasy, RPGs, and card battlers, Nights in Tight Spaces was almost too good to be true. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. At the beginning of the game, you choose one of 4 initial classes, and you can see that there are several others that you can unlock: Brawler, Fighter, Rogue, and Sorcerer. Sorcerer? Well, that looks interesting. In Fight in Tight Spaces, this initial choice was more a choice of playstyle and overarching strategy, but there weren't any restrictions pertaining to the cards that you could pick up along the way. In Nights in Tight Spaces, there are cards that can only be played by certain classes. Head Smash, Grapple, and Shoulder Throw, for example, can only be used by unarmed classes like the Brawler, while Lightning spells can only be used by characters who have magic.
Well, alright.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting classes to be so RPG-ish in Nights in Tight Spaces. Also, the game does a surprisingly good job at painting the picture of a proper initial RPG adventure. If you play a fighter, you start the game as an irreverent, no-good drunkard who outstayed his welcome at the local tavern. So when the tavern keeper is about to tell you to get the fuck out, a group of troublemakers who are up to no good start a fight. So you beat the shit out of the goons and protect yourself and the tavern keeper in the process. Your fighting prowess does not go unnoticed, and that's how you get offered a small-time job in exchange for some drinking money. An opportunity that you're definitely not going to let pass. Work begets work, as is usually the case in these medieval settings, and soon you find yourself in someone's bad side, getting lured into a fighting tournament that turns out to be an ambush, making daring escapes, daring rescues, and eventually fighting to prevent a full-blown demon invasion from pouring into the realm.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
There are dialogue choices, side quests, and companions that you can recruit at the local tavern or that choose to join you because their goals and quests happen to coincide with yours. And they even have their own intervention during the game's many story moments. And I was not expecting this at all from a sequel to Fight in Tight Spaces, a game in which the story is little more than an excuse for you to go out there and kick some ass. Also, the snarky humor, the witty comebacks, and the smart-ass one-liners that we had in Fight in Tight Spaces are back, in spades. But I felt like that type of humor was fitting for the main character in Fight in Tight Spaces, who was some sort of James Bond and John Wick crossover. But in a medieval fantasy setting, it felt a little bit out of place at first. But I eventually came to terms with it, and I ended up having more than a chuckle or two. A lot of the humor didn't land with me, but some of the phrases wouldn't have been out of place in a Schwarzenegger or Stallone flick from the 80s and 90s. And you know what? I'm totally okay with that. There's this one side quest in which a widow asks you to retrieve an amulet from her dead husband, and this is how the conversation goes. You say, "So I hear you're looking for someone to handle a dirty job?" To which she replies, "Dirty? Perhaps, more like underground. Tell me, have you ever dug up a corpse?" You answer, "Putting bodies in the ground is more my thing, but I can be flexible. Whose rests need disturbing?" "My husband's," she says. "He was buried with a family heirloom, a golden amulet laden with emeralds, and I want it back. Alas, I was too grief-stricken to attend the funeral, and his grave remains unmarked. I'm afraid you'll need to do a little detective work, with a shovel," she adds. And if you accept the quest and dig around the cemetery for a while, you'll eventually find Eva's husband. And the fact that she conveniently forgot to mention that the dude had a tendency to come back to life every now and then. So naturally, he's not particularly happy that you disturbed his remains to steal from him, so he tries to make you pay for it. Once the fight is over, however, you can choose to keep the amulet for yourself, or you can go back to Eva to tell her what transpired. And if you choose to do the latter, then this conversation takes place. "Well, do you have it?" "I do, though I had to kill your husband again to get it. The dead just don't rest like they used to." That's so typical of him. Well, I'd say you've earned your pay. Take this too. I have no use for it anymore." And she hands you a bottle of poison. And she adds, "Oh, don't judge me. He was far worse when he was alive, I assure you." Yup, that's the kind of thing that you can find in Nights in Tight Spaces. Gear is also a thing in this game. You can purchase some weapon and armor from merchants, and you can also get a few things as rewards from completing some mandatory and non-mandatory quests. Not every class has the same gear slots, however. Fighters can equip swords, shields, and body armor, while brawlers can only equip a consumable item. And you can equip yourself and or your party members with gear. And if you guys are anything like the crowd that hangs out on Discord, you're probably thinking, "Man, I'm actually liking a lot of what I'm hearing. There's a story and you go from being a drunken asshole to saving the kingdom. There are quests and side quests. There's 80s like one-liners. There are classes that you can play as and they have different play styles. There are companions. There are dialogue choices. The medieval settings that I'm looking at look cooler than the ones in Fight in Tight Spaces. What's not to like about this?" Yes, everything's great.
Apart from, of course, playing the game part.
Fight in Tight Spaces is not my favorite cart battler, and there are things that I positively do not like about it, but one of the reasons cart battler enjoyers like it so much is that the game's mechanics and features are exactly what they need to be for the type of gameplay it offers. Not a single mechanic goes to waste, and not a single feature feels like an accessory. It's a round, solid game. Nights in Tight Spaces, on the other hand, feels cluttered and bloated with mechanics that don't really add anything to the core gameplay and don't change the way you play the game compared to Fight in Tight Spaces. Gear, for example, doesn't work the way it does in Dice Legends, which we also talked about on this list. In Dice Legends, you can find a chest armor piece that generates a bunch of armor at the beginning of the battle, depending on how much strength you have, and then you have a card that deals 2x your armor rating and damage. Gear in Nights in Tight Spaces seems to be a part of the game because someone said, "It would be cool to have a few RPG mechanics," but the devs simply added them as an additional game mechanic without bothering to weave it into the gameplay properly. Same thing goes with companions. Positioning your companions so that they score combo hits is fun, but this comes at the expense of certain enemy types that you had in fight in tight spaces, like this motherfucker with a machine gun. He was like having a Californian 20-year-old Karen girlfriend. He punished you for everything you did, and you had to think over every move 20 times before acting. He was a pain in the ass, but he embodied the fights in tight spaces experience. These enemies wouldn't have been viable in Nights in Tight Spaces because of companions. Also, companions had a thick layer of micromanaging that the original game didn't have. Fight in Tight Spaces was, well, tighter, better paced, and even more challenging, I would dare say. And perhaps the worst part of it all is that, except magic cards, almost all the cards in the game were already in Fight in Tight Spaces, and they are called the same. Shove, push, heavy attack, quick kick, all those moves are back. I was expecting to have different cards and enemies with different types of attacks, given the fact that the theme in this game is completely different from that of its predecessor. But nope, you play the game in the exact same way, and that's the big difference with a sequel like Monster Train 2, in which you get not one, but 5 factions that use different logic. If it were not for the story, Nights in Tight Spaces would feel like a medieval mod that you can download from Nexus Mods for fights in tight spaces, with extra mechanics that don't really add anything, and that's not good. I think Nights in Tight Spaces is a good time for one run, and that's just not good enough for a card battler. Number 6. Terminator 2 No Fate. So, the Terminator 2 is my favorite action film of all time, if you don't consider The Empire Strikes Back an action film. So when I saw Terminator 2D No Fate announced and I scoped out some of the footage, I thought,
Shut up and take my money!
But I wanted 2 things and 2 things only from this game. First, I wanted it to go hard in the paint with that nostalgia. I wanted it to be shameless with copious amounts of member berries. And second, I wanted it to be a good game, reminiscent of the great games that we had back in the day, like Contra 3 Alien Wars. I think those are the 2 basic components of a proper tribute or throwback game. Well, at least Terminator 2D No Fate did one of those things right. If you love Terminator 2, there is no way this game is not going to put a huge smile on your face. After the initial bridge levels that are there to fill in the gap of the story between the Terminator and the Terminator 2, which we could have done without, the game replicates the film almost to the T. We're talking dialogue, gestures, iconic moments, and of course every memorable action set piece in the film. Though they missed a couple of moments that would have been easy layups, like this moment in which Arnie says,
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
and the guy famously answers,
You forgot to say please.
and then does this. Why isn't this in the game? But I really have to say bravo for the way in which they managed to gamify some of the scenes in the film. This is a side-scrolling action game after all, not an RPG or a point-and-click adventure game, so you might imagine they had to put in some serious creativity to gamify some of the less actiony moments in the story. This is one hell of a wink-wink for fans of the film. So good stuff, right?
Wrong.
Yeah, the game is great.
Apart from, of course, playing the game part.
Yeah, it's that second thing that I was expecting from this game that was a monumental letdown. We have gotten some killer throwback games recently. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, Streets of Rage 4, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, Shinobi The Art of Vengeance. These are games that pay proper tribute to some of the old shit we used to love. But they are also great games all by themselves. Terminator 2D No Fate is not one of those games. Characters have the mobility of a body positivity activist, and character animations don't do the experience any favors. Walking feels clunky, shooting feels clunky, and climbing up to higher platforms, and especially dropping down to lower levels when you get prompted to do so, is an exercise of frustration. Contra 3 Alien Wars came out 34 years ago, and moving around and shooting felt seamless and straight out awesome to do in that game. Side-scrolling levels in which you run and shoot things makes up the bulk of the gameplay in Terminator 2D No Fate, but those are the levels in which the game's shortcomings are most obvious. All characters feel stiff, but the worst offender is the Terminator himself. It's flat out frustrating to play as Arnie. He can't jump or duck, and charging against enemies feels weak, which makes him feel severely underpowered because walking about with a minigun is not all that different from shooting a machine gun with Sarah. Speaking of Arnie, there are way too few levels in which you get to actually play as the Terminator. Most of his appearances happen in scripted little cutscenes in which you obviously don't control the character. You need to finish the game following the canonical story before you can unlock the alternative paths in the story. These alternative paths take the form of choices that let you play a what-if version of the story of the Terminator 2 movie. Choosing a non-canonical path unlocks some of the levels in which you get to play as the Terminator. You also get a few different levels, different cutscenes, and you get to play some levels with different characters. The game has a few levels that take place after the end of the movie, and these are the worst levels of the lot. First, they don't really add anything to the story. The Terminator 2 ending is one of the best endings ever. The fact that there are still levels after the climax of the story feels off. You guys know that I kill for significant choices in a video game, but this is one of the few games in which I think having choices makes the game worse. Many of the alternative levels have to do with action set pieces that are actually in the movie, like Arnie taking care of an entire police squad. In the canonical version of the game, this scene is not gamified, and it's tremendously frustrating. You have to play the game again and go down a non-canonical decision to get this scene. Also, the choices that you make undermine the story of the original movie and make the whole thing feel wrong. This game would have been much better if there hadn't been any choices to make in the story, if those alternative levels had been a part of the canonical path, which again should have been the only path, and if you didn't have any levels after the level that represents the ending of the movie. Not only because they undermine the climax of the story and don't add anything to it, but because the game's controls are way too clunky for all the jumping around and platforming that the game asks you to do during these last levels. Also, guns are highly derivative of the Contra franchise, but you only get them in a handful of levels and you can't plan your strategy around them, because rather than staying with you until you pick another gun, as it happens in Contra, they last for a limited time. You also can't switch weapons or shoot both of them at the same time as you could in Contra 3. That's right, after playing Terminator 2D No Fate, I replayed Contra 3 just for comparison's sake and to see if it was as good as I remembered it. And I can tell you, it's not even remotely close, guys. The Terminator 2D No Fate is not even in the same universe as the game that came out 34 years ago, and I think the devs should feel bad about this. Number 5, Hellclock. When I first saw footage of Hellclock, I was immediately curious about what the game had to offer. It looked like it sat somewhere in between Diablo 2 and Hades, and it took place in a setting that you don't ever see in video games, the late 1800s rural Brazil. It also seemed to take its story seriously, and the word was that the game felt good to play and that it was a labor of love. And luckily I got a code to give it a shot and show it over on CBS, and my initial impressions were quite good actually. I guess you could say the game started with the right foot with me. See what I did there? Right foot, right foot. I already talked extensively about the things that I didn't like about this game, but I guess it boils down to, first, it's a roguelite, but in every run you get the exact same settings and you get almost the exact same collection of enemies, including bosses. There are no alternating boss fights here. Second, meta progression is much more important than getting better at the game with every run, so the game rewards you more for playing the game than for getting good at it, and this is a serious issue. Third, enemies are just not varied enough. Basically, it's true what this user said on Steam. It's a game that borrows elements from Diablo and Hades, but it doesn't do anything as well as either of those games. All in all, major letdown considering how high my expectations were at some point. Number 4, Eriksholm, The Stolen Dream. I did my research, guys. I promise I did. I didn't go out on a limb with this one. I saw footage, I saw reviews, And then I decided I wanted to play this game, and I was under the impression that this was going to be a game like Desperados 3, which is one of my favorite games from the 2020s so far, only in a cool setting and with killer graphics. I will say this about Eriksholm though, it tells one of the best stories told in a video game in 2025. The voice acting is actually very impressive, and the facial animations that you get during the cutscenes tell half the story, which I think is great. In fact, this game has the best opening cutscene of the year in my opinion. Without a single line of exposition, you get introduced to the characters, the setting, and the conflict of the game in a way that's gripping and gets you immediately invested in what's going on. I constantly hear writers of games that I get codes for try to justify why they over-explained this, that, or the other thing, or why this, that, or the other plot convenient event had to happen. Guys, if any of you are watching, play this game, because this right here is how you do it. Characters need to pull the carriage of the story, not the other way around. The use of dialogue during this initial scene, the silent moments, the facial animations, the lighting, the clothes, the setting, the use of the ellipses to cut out the things that don't add anything to the passage is simply perfect. 10 out of 10 scene. The story starts to lose a little bit of steam near the end. Seasoned, stoic, no bullshit characters start to get overly dramatic over shit that doesn't matter. A 16-year-old character gets a little too Mary Sue-ish, and a group called the Sakin gets introduced as the real big threat that we're supposed to care about, but we have to trust the characters on that one because we never see them doing evil shit. Or anything for that matter, they simply don't appear in the game. Graphics are also fantastic. Not fantastic, fantastic. City spaces look lived in, busy, and intricate. Attention to detail is the name of the game, and that's why the setting in which the story takes place is the living, breathing picture of the descent into indolence and abandonment that nations go through under totalitarian regimes. Animations are also rich and elaborate, and this includes facial animations during cutscenes. The UI is polished and consistent with the rest of the art, and even the little collectibles that you find over the course of the game look like something you'd want to print and hang on your wall. But like many other titles on this list, the problem in this game is,
Of course, playing the game part.
Eriksholm feels like Desperados 3 without the cool skills, the emergent gameplay, the fun factor, the replay value, or the funny moments. Rather than objectives that you can't tackle in endless different ways, you get puzzles that 90% of the time can only be solved in one way. Rather than secondary objectives and challenges that tie into the story, as is the case in Desperados 3, you have boring collectibles that don't add much other than a tiny bit of world building. Instead of fun, unique, and over-the-top skills like a giant bear trap called Bianca and a cat that distracts enemies, your characters in Eriksholm have abilities like being able to swim. Get caught and it's the end of the attempt. Try again. The game doesn't give you a chance to deal with your mistakes with creativity by running away or hiding or pulling out the lead spitters and killing everyone if things go tits up. Eriksholm, the stolen dream, is just flat out
Boring!
And when I see that it has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, I can't help but think, wow, look at how many people haven't played Desperados 3. Number 3, Dust Raiders. Dust Raiders is a scam. There is no way to candy coat it. I already talked about it extensively on the video about the RPGs that didn't do it for me in 2025, so I will be quick this time. Dust Raiders was promoted as a Mad Max-inspired crossover between Dustland Delivery, Death Roads, and War Tales, and I took the bait hook, line, and sinker like an overhyped 20-year-old sports fan with the latest FIFA game. And well, to say that the game didn't implement any of the mechanics and design choices that it borrowed from those other games properly would be a colossal understatement. Combat is similar to the one in Death Roads, but it uses skills with cooldown times instead of cards. The problem is that it lacks the tactical depth, the fun factor, or the unmitigated badassery of that game. The Wasteland sandbox aspect of the game is like the one in Dustland Delivery, but without any of its survival mechanics, the feeling of adventure, the gripping quest, the vehicle progression or stronghold management features, the complex trade, actions, the character customization or progression system, or any of the other things that make that other game great. Some people have said it's bare bones, but I think they are being extremely charitable because not even the bones are good in this one. It currently has mixed reviews on Steam, and I still think it's overrated. Number 2, Age of Reforging, the Freelands. Listen to me, friends, and listen to me carefully. Someday, and that day may never come, a clueless hack who doesn't know anything about anything is going to make a video. And he's going to give it a title along the lines of RPGs that you missed but that you should have played, or some shit like that. And he's going to try to sell you that this, that, or the other game that was never talked about in the mainstream space, and that never became a cult classic in the relevant niche either, is some sort of underrated title that was unfairly overlooked for some whimsical reason. And in that list, you are going to see the Age of Reforging. Do not listen to that snake oil salesman. Age of Reforging is not some hidden gem that you missed out on. It's not a misunderstood game, and the problem is not that it's not for me. You could make that case with Clair Obscure Expedition 33, or Drova, or Beyond Galaxyland, or Scald, or any of the other games that I've talked about here on the channel that I wasn't crazy about. But not Age of Reforging. This one is trying to be for me, and it fails. It fails miserably, and it fails because it is a game made for longtime CRPG fans by people who don't understand why CRPG enjoyers like RPGs. It has all the features and mechanics that you'd expect from a CRPG, and from a sandbox RPG even. In fact, it was the promotion of these features what got me super excited about this one. I was already thinking about how I would surprise you guys with this new phenomenal CRPG that no one was talking about, that had come out of nowhere to sweep me off my feet. The thing is that all these features and mechanics are implemented in ways that fail to serve their purpose, precisely because they are treated as a checklist made by people who don't get it. There is no feeling of adventure to the game's survival mechanics or to the quests. There is no weight or impact to the choices you make. The story feels like an AI-generated average of every fantasy trope ever. There is no world-building aspect to the narration, the setting in which the game takes place, the graphics, or the dialogue. Characters have quirks rather than a personality. Everything feels either sickeningly utilitarian or extremely shallow, or both of these things. I like my medieval fantasy CRPG as much as you do, guys, and I know that there aren't enough of them, but that doesn't mean that all of them are worth playing. Case in point, Age of Reforging the Freelands. Number 1, Avowed. You guys know Angry Joe. You know there is very little overlap between the games that he covers and the ones that I talked about here on the channel. Now, I saw his list of most disappointing games of 2025. Half of the titles on that list I didn't even know about. But when his top pick came out, I just had to laugh. I had to. Imagine how disappointing a game has to be the top pick in two very different lists of most disappointing titles made by two completely different people who cover completely different spectrums of the gaming market. Let that sink in, guys. My expectations weren't great to begin with. The price, the people who were promoting it, the fact that it wasn't a CRPG but more of an Elder Scrolls-like game, the circles in which the game was being talked about, none of that sounded right to me. And I was still disappointed. I made an hour-long video about it here on the channel, so I won't reiterate over what I said there. But Avowed not only failed as a game that has the Pillars of Eternity brand attached to it, I was expecting it not to live up to the legacy of Pillars of Eternity, but I wasn't expecting it to be so sickeningly simplified, handholdy, and generic. I wasn't expecting unkillable static NPCs. I wasn't expecting a complete absence of non-combat mechanics like stealth, pickpocketing, or proper lockpicking, which this isn't. I wasn't expecting insultingly dumbed down crafting mechanics and insultingly dumbed down puzzles. You could say whatever you wish about Dragon Age, Veilguard, and Bloodlines 2, but we saw those catastrophes coming a mile away. We were expecting these games to be dog shit, and they delivered in spades. As for Avowed, I was expecting it to be underwhelming. I was expecting to roll my eyes once or twice, but not this level of aggressive whateverism. Easy top pick for this list. And that's it. I didn't play Bloodlines 2 or The Outer Worlds 2 because I knew better, so these are my picks for most disappointing games of 2025. What are yours? Tell us all about it in the comment section. And stay tuned, because coming up next is a video on the most pleasant surprises of 2025. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.